Hello, everyone, and welcome into FCC Talk. I am your host, John Rhodes, the Children and Family Minister here at First Christian Church. If you haven't caught on yet, that's what the FCC stands for. Congratulations to you if you already knew that. One guy who definitely knew that, because he has just got a lot going on up there in the brain, is Dan Stribling, who's with me today. Dan, how you doing?
I'm doing great, John. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I am doing great. So
Me
we
and
had an
my full brain
interesting
over here.
we got an interesting topic for you today here on FCC Talk. An article written over on Relevant Magazine, relevantmagazine.com. I apologize.
Hmm.
Good little website over there. They do a good job. Always thought-provoking stuff that they write about, and some opinion stuff, some new stuff. So that's a website I like to go to from time. And there was an article written about five uncomfortable issues the church needs to talk about. And I thought, what better place to talk about these five uncomfortable issues than FCC Talk? Right, Dan?
Why not?
So that's what we're going to do in this one. It's not anything too earth shattering or anything like that, but I'm going to bring up each of the five that the person, the author, I guess I should say the author's name. I apologize. Zachary K. Perkins. I'll bring up each
Hmm.
thing that Zachary brings up, kind of summarize his thoughts a little bit, real briefly, and then Dan and I can have a little bit of back and forth and what we think with the subject. So, without further ado, we'll go ahead and get
All
into
right.
it. The number one, I guess he didn't rank them, so I shouldn't say number one. Just the first
Yeah.
thing that he
First
brought up,
topic.
yeah, first topic that he brought up is addiction. So he referenced that churchgoers often avoid discussing addiction, treating some like alcoholism as taboo, while others, smoking are acceptable, leading to gossip instead of support. Don't want to talk about gluttony and stuff like that. But they just kind of the issue with kind of some addictions he feels like are okay to bring up, some of them not okay to bring up. When in reality, there should be a safe space at church to be able to discuss these things and get support and help for them, number one, but also two, that truth would be spoken about all addiction, that it's not just some addiction is bad, other addiction, we don't need to worry about that. Dan, your thoughts on this first topic?
Well, I think with this first topic and kind of going through all five of these topics, it helps to sort of have a little bit of groundwork in place to kind of understand where some of this might be coming from the perspective of the person who's writing it in the first place, right? So, a challenging thing when we start talking about these sorts of things is first off, it can get a little bit amorphous as to like what is the person who's asking the questions looking to get out of it, like what is the solution that they're seeking. And so I think for our conversation today we're going to kind of be talking from a bit of a broad perspective, that sort of thing. Is that right, John, where we're just kind of looking at it in kind of in
Yes, precisely.
specific terms? Okay, very good. So when it comes to addiction, I think a lot of this again depends upon your particular church experience. I feel like here at FCC, at least from the pulpit, Chris, myself, CJ, you, all five of these things that we're going to talk about today, one or more of us has talked about them and addressed them in our messages along the lines that he's referencing. So, once again, I think some of this depends on the church experience that you've had. If I rewind my church experience about 20 or 30 years, I see all five of these things because in the church that I grew up in, I experienced a lot of this, but not currently. It's interesting. As far as addiction goes, I feel like here at FCC, we do address addiction. However, there is definitely something of this sort of taboo against certain ones in terms of other ones. And even I still feel that, not necessarily so much like, from the pulpit, but in the church culture, right? There are even certain negative behaviors that I think oftentimes can get celebrated in our church culture when really they should be called out. One of the main ones that I've noticed, and growing up in a pastor's home, this whole thing, and living through that experience of having a dad who was, a servant of the church, constantly on call, and other people from different jobs have this experience as well. You know, there's an old term. I don't even think we use it much anymore. Years ago, we used to use the term workaholic. Is that still even really a thing? Do people still use
Yeah,
that term?
I've heard it a few times. Probably not as much
Okay.
as back in the
I don't
day,
think
but
it's
yeah.
as prevalent as it used to be, but it was basically a term, because there was this cultural movement in what would it be like? Probably the baby boomer generation, where this idea they elevated the value of their labor above. It was a cultural thing where it was elevated above everything else, basically, and it produced this term workaholic, where people that it became like an addiction. But that is something that oftentimes we can glorify, even though his family's suffering. They don't ever see him, but you know what? He's a hard worker. Not saying work is bad, but just like the Bible would encourage us, there's balance and moderation in all things. Look at the fruits of the Spirit. So might be getting a little bit off topic. I'd like to hear what you have to say a little bit too, specifically on addiction in the church, how we're dealing with it, and what you think we might be able to do better.
Yeah, no, I think you bring up a really good point. The workaholic thing is definitely something that I have seen in, the previous, I shouldn't say the previous culture, in cultures past. I don't think it's as much of a
Mm-hmm.
thing today. I've heard stories of churches with like, people in the office, and church members would call the office at like
Yeah,
4:55 or something like that to see if the minister was still in the office, because if he wasn't in the office,
he's
things are
not
getting real bad.
working.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Don't get me wrong, there does need to be accountability to make sure that people are working and they're actually using their time correctly and not just doing whatever they want out there. But it was also kind of like, if you don't trust your minister that he is working hard, then you probably need to have a conversation other than, I'm going to call the church office and see how many times the phone rings and you know the pastor answers the
Right,
phone.
right, right, right. And that's
But
just one
good.
example. That was
Right.
just one example too. There's a
Yeah.
number of other things that could fall into this category,
And
and I
that's what I
think
wanted to
really,
say was that it's important
yeah.
that you have a church with multiple different voices. And I think that's one thing that I love about our church is that, and I'm not saying that we're perfect by any means, but I just think this is one area that it's helpful, is that we do have multiple different voices. Obviously, Chris Gregg is senior minister. He has the primary
Hmm.
voice coming from the preaching and stuff like that. However, we have a group of elders who can all teach. We have Sunday school teachers who all teach. We have me, you, CJ, Mark, who all have opportunities to speak from the stage as well, and to preach and do those things. And that's issues I see with the addiction conversation is typically we avoid what we are addicted to publicly because we don't want to make it known. So if you have a minister who struggles with gluttony, then he's probably not going to
Hmm.
speak on that as much. If you have a minister
Yeah.
who struggles with alcoholism, you're going to probably not have a minister who preaches about that very often or talks about that. It's why it's important, because everybody has different struggles. I'm not trying to say that that we should just accept these struggles and move on. But everybody has different struggles, which makes some subjects more difficult for people to speak on than others. And it's important that churches
Hmm.
have the one senior minister. Yes, they do need to have that, but they have multiple different voices that also speak into the congregation from the Word of God.
I completely agree. I also think that with addiction as a specific topic, there's something of a process there. Addiction really begins with the ability to recognize that it exists.
Mhm.
So in the church, as we teach about God's perfect plan for people, that should inherently, in and of itself, shine lights into those areas of our lives where we might be struggling with some kind of addiction. We may not even realize it is an addiction or that there's a problem with our behavior. That's the purpose of the law. It shines a light onto what we're doing to show us how we can do better to line up with God's perfect plan for us. And then the second step of that, of course, would be addressing the addiction. And this is where things do get a little bit more challenging, and why it's good to have all those different voices that are teaching and, guiding on that subject. But if somebody comes into the church genuinely seeking for help, if you're looking for a practical solution, you've gone through step one, you recognize that you have a problem, I would say the best place to start is probably by going to one of the members of the staff. Like, if you're really looking for a solution and you don't have a close friend or a group or somebody in the church that you can take this to, start with a member of the staff, and we will do our best to try to point you in the right direction. none of us are professional counselors. None of us are professional addiction counselors or psychologists or anything like that. But we will meet you where you are and try to provide some solutions and guidance to help you down that path. And I think that it might be a step that gets a little bit lost. Is like, okay, I know that I have this problem, but the church just isn't really helping me get over it. Well, we do want to help, but I also think it's kind of up to each one of us individually to take that first step to seek it.
Yeah, well said. Well said. I agree. Let's move on to the second topic here, Dan. The second topic is sexuality, and the author, Zachary, talks about how churches are quick to condemn things like premarital sex. However, they rarely discuss sexual struggles, identity issues, marital frustrations, leaving some individuals possibly feel isolated. Sexuality is more of a complex issue rather than a simple choice that could foster the environment of sharing burdens and realizing others face similar issues. Zach, this is a large topic, one that could go in multiple different directions, but
Yeah, this one's
your
big.
thoughts. Yeah, you're curious your thoughts here, not just from our church's perspective, but because we going through First Corinthians right now, and there is some content in there that could be
Yeah,
on this topic, but not
yeah,
just from
absolutely.
our not just from our church's perspective, but just kind of the perspective of churches and how this should be discussed and things like that.
Yeah. No, I think that this is an incredibly deep one, because also when we're talking about sexuality, we're talking about something that is intensely personal to each individual person. So my first question to him, honestly, after I read this article, it left me kind of wondering where he was coming from a little bit, because he paints kind of in this really broad brush stroke. And my question to him is like, it's like, what do you want? What do you want to see the church provide for this? What does it really mean that the church isn't providing a place for people, okay? Because we're talking about something that is deeply intimate and personal. A lot of churches do, at least that I've been familiar with, and I know that we do this here to a certain extent too, because we talk a lot about, this is what the Bible says, and this is what it looks like in terms of God's plan for your life. And so we talk about the biblical plan for marriage and what that represents, because we live in a culture that does nothing but send us confusing messages about what sexuality is and what our role in that should be. Whereas God, he lays it out very, very clearly for us in Scripture. So the question for me is, what are you looking for from the church? Because this is a very, very personal thing. How does the church go about addressing this beyond the teaching, right? This is what the Bible says. I find it interesting that at the end of the article, he spends about half this section in the sexuality part talking basically about, how hard it is for a young married couple who abstained prior to marriage and the challenges that they can run into after marriage, as if that is somehow the hardest struggle that people have with sexuality. And given that brings with it its own unique set of challenges. But we live in an incredibly confusing time. And I have seen way more people that come to Christ and then have to deal with this incredible amount of guilt and this incredible amount of baggage and this incredible amount of damage from the actions that they did, either, just in sin, either before they knew Christ or just making bad decisions. To me, that's a much larger issue than, what he's talking about here. So how does the church deal with that? Once again, a lot of it comes down to individual connections, I think. Talking with your staff, forging relationships. Okay, here's another idea I've had, though. Here's another idea, and then I want to hear what you have to say about this. I've thought for a long time it would be awesome to have a marriage group that is led not by somebody like me. I would rather get a couple of couples in there leading it who have been married to each other for at least 50 years. Okay? We're talking about long-term, successfully married people to lead a group that you could be a part of, where we could have some of these more challenging discussions, and to have people there who can speak from literally years of experience. I can speak from some experience, but not that level of experience. So I think maybe that could be a practical solution to kind of address some of these things that doesn't go into, we're talking like professional counseling realms. Anyway, what do you think? I'm done rambling.
No, I think you had a lot of good thoughts there. I think that sexuality is just such a huge overarching topic, and I think that everybody experiences different sexual struggles for the most part. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
right now in our society, there are so many different ways that you could talk about sexuality where people are maybe thriving or struggling or what's going if you speak about or if you preach about sexuality, it's never gonna probably feel like the minister or the preacher or whoever it might be is speaking directly to you. And I think that's something that people yearn for in preaching and biblical teaching
Yeah.
sometimes is they kind of want something that addresses specifically to them and what they're going through because guess what, in today's day and age everything is on demand. It's exactly what you want and it's exactly what you need. So it's hard to sit there and go through a topic on, let's say, let's just say homosexual struggles or something like that when you're a newlywed couple and you are struggling with, having sex yourself. That's a
Mm-hmm.
struggle, and you don't really find yourself in that situation because you're dealing with something completely different. That's kind of the biggest issue to me with this is that it's such an overarching topic. It really, I mean, churches, I shouldn't say churches need to be censored or anything like that, but churches do need to be careful with the way they address the subject because there
Oh,
are so many
absolutely.
different ways. Thankfully, in America, we don't have to be as careful as some, but there are other places around the world that do need to be very, very careful with how the subject is discussed. Otherwise, you could lose, the church, you could lose so much. Situation should not make us fear anything. We should still follow the word of God. But you see what I'm saying is that
Yeah.
it's a difficult subject to talk about. My
Yeah.
main thing
Very.
is that we need to reframe how we have the discussion about sexuality. It oftentimes gets, the label of like the boogeyman or, ooh, we can't
Mm-hmm.
talk about this today or something like that. When in reality, what does the Bible do when it talks about sexuality? The Bible, in Song of Solomon, Song of Songs, whatever you want to call it, has an entire book that is all about good, honest, fulfilling, flourishing sexuality between two people the way it's essentially meant to be. I mean, and to me, that needs to be where we start the from more often than not. Somebody that I was watching on YouTube the other day, unfortunately I forget who it was, but he was talking about how he only began to change his viewpoint on sexuality when he stopped seeing it as the enemy and started seeing it as the blessing that God intended for it to be. And I think unfortunately sometimes in our culture, in our lives, we see what God has given us, and the devil tries to turn it into something else. And oh, it's the
That's
boogeyman.
right.
Oh, it's this, that's that, it's the other. When we need to understand it's a blessing, understand it's from God, and understand that it's something that is good for our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, Satan can take something that's good and twist it into different ways. We know that, but it's
Absolutely.
something that's good for our lives and that we need to have a better viewpoint on because, like I said, sometimes we just have a viewpoint, sometimes we have a perspective about it that is negative when in reality it does need to be more positive. And I
Mm-hmm.
made that shift. I think if we made that shift as, a church culture, as a Christian culture, then this subject would not be so taboo and so difficult to talk about and so, hard to pin down. It would be something
Mm-hmm.
that would be more celebrated and that we would enjoy hearing about
Yeah.
more.
Absolutely. Perspective really, really matters. It really, really matters. And if we started looking at things in terms of the good that God intended rather than the evil that the devil tries to twist it into, I think we'd be a lot better off for sure.
Totally. I totally agree. All right,
Mhm.
Dan. Number three that Zachary brings up here is sincere doubt, he says. So he talks about how
Yeah.
many Christians, including pastors, struggle with doubt. They
Hmm.
experience through apologetics,
Yeah.
or despite apologetics and prayer, and they continue on this routine, sometimes feeling hollow inside, sometimes feeling lonely. Does anybody else feel Hey, am I a terrible Christian? Do I actually follow God? If I've not, or if I do experience doubt, how to deal with it, stuff like that. Dan, I feel like this is an area where our church does a pretty good job, in my opinion, of talking about it. I know that I've talked about doubt from the pulpit multiple times, never been received in a poor way, at least
Hmm.
not that it's been communicated to me. It's always been received in a positive way. Now, obviously, we're not perfect, but just your
Yeah.
thoughts on churches, how they talk about sincere doubt, our church, other churches, however you want to go at it.
I actually think, and I'm trying to think of the right way to actually phrase this. Out of these five, I think that the area of doubt to me is the area that I think the church actually does the worst job, to be honest with you. And because there is a serious stigma around doubt that I see and that I've experienced over the years. Now, in our church context, well, let me put it this way: when we talk about things like an addiction, or if somebody were to come to into a group or in the church context and bring up that, hey, I'm struggling with this particular sexual sin, I have seen, and there should be a tremendous amount of grace, shown to those people. Say, okay, we want to help guide you through this. We want, this there to be healing. We want there to be restoration. We want all these good things. Doubt is like Doubt's like the little evil thing in the corner. You know what I mean? That nobody really wants to look at because it's very, very insidious. It sneaks in. It's very, very stealthy, right? And it likes to kind of, like I said, hide in the shadows. And so we sort of get this idea as Christians that part of what validates us as being Christians is 100% confidence and commitment to what it is that we believe. And yet, when we admit to having doubts, those sort of like chinks in our armor, that kind of expose the weakness beneath, right? Those come across, I think, as being very, very threatening, and especially as somebody who is on staff, or if you're in a position of leadership, if you are a teacher, if you are a volunteer, heck, even if you're just helping behind the scenes, to express that you might have doubt in an area actually is very, very, can be very, very damaging for you in the eyes of the church. And rather than having the same grace extended to you that we would oftentimes see extended to some of these more overt, challenging things, I think doubt is very, very insidious. And I think that it's incumbent upon us as believers that we sort of need to get this picture in our mind. We need to reframe this picture in our mind that, commitment to Christ isn't always the way, the way that I see it isn't necessarily going to be the way that somebody else is experiencing it. Right. And we need to make room for grace and for patience and stuff, and give people a chance to speak their doubt and then seek the answer, because that's ultimately what the scripture says to do. Doubt is an opportunity to seek the Lord more and to find answers, not to hang your hat on the question and say, well, I don't know the answer, so I'm checking out. Okay. What are your thoughts, John? What do you think about this one?
Yeah, no, I love what you had to say there. It's definitely an opportunity to seek God out more, to learn more from Him, to grow closer to Him, and I think
Hmm.
that is kind of the biggest. And that's why we do need to be so open with hearing other people's doubts, hearing their struggles, what's going on in their faith, and understanding that everybody is not in the same place. Because if all of us just say, if any of us, I should say, if any of us try to say, well, doubted before and I've always been totally on fire for God, I don't
Hmm.
think you've actually ever wrestled with your faith, because you have to live out your faith. And when you live out your faith, there are going to be times when either things don't make sense, where you're
Yep.
challenged, where you have a struggle, something goes on, and you experience that, and you have to either go one of two ways. You have to either go away from God, or you have to
Hmm.
go to God. If you stay stagnant, then you are just not dealing with your doubt at all, which is a very unhealthy thing to do,
Right.
or you just
Hmm.
are somebody who actually doesn't think about it. You actually have no connection to faith. You're somebody who just is going through the motions, which God, has thoughts about that as well.
And they're not
In and of
good.
that. Yeah, exactly. But see what I'm saying is like basically we need to make room for people to communicate their doubts because God makes room for us to communicate to him. And if we are going to be like if we are going to follow in his footsteps, if we're going to trust and obey, do what he has to say, then we also need to help others have those same experiences with us as well. If somebody came to me tomorrow, if you, CJ, Chris, anybody came to me tomorrow and says, John, I'm really struggling right now, I'm doubting God in this area of my life, I would sit there and I would
Hmm.
say, I have to. Or,
Hmm.
maybe I've been through something you've been through, and
Yeah.
let's look at this together. Let's grow closer to God together through this. I'll check in on you. I'll be there for you if you need anything. Don't want to push
Hmm.
too hard, but also want to make sure I'm there for you and can assist you
Right.
in any way that we can. And I think Chris has done a good job of kind of framing it in the conversation of a little bit of he calls it deconstruction. I've always called it kind of like reconstruction of our faith a little bit because
Hmm.
deconstruction you really can go two different ways, and really it is wrestling
Right.
with the doubt in your life when you do that.
Right.
I like to think of
Asking
it
the
as
hard questions. Yeah.
I like to think of it as reconstruction because you're going in with the goal of okay, this is what I think. I'm having doubts. I want to try and go to God and figure out, how can construct this to better understand him, better understand the situation. And I think that that's a huge thing that, quite honestly, it needs to experience at least once in their lives. Otherwise, I don't
Yeah.
think our faith is as strong.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Well, we have to get everybody in their spiritual journey will get to the point where they have questions they don't have the answers for. And really, oftentimes, I think when it comes to sincere doubt, most of them come from experiences. Like we start off in our faith journey and things are, going well, we're learning, and then something happens. And we kind of step back a little bit and say, wait a minute, but I thought God said fill in the blank. Right. And so we all have doubts. That is a common experience, and I just hope that in the church, I do think that saying things like this in this article, just looking at the church and saying, "Hey, church, we need to do a good job about allowing people space to express their doubts." Because doubts, I think, too, I don't want to go on too much more on this, but I think doubts oftentimes to people can come across as threats because they do ask hard questions. And if we don't know the answers, that can make us uncomfortable ourselves. So as a church, we need to be secure in our faith. We always need to have an answer for the faith that we have. And we need to give people grace and the space to share their doubts, not for the purpose of tearing the church down, but so that we can all get closer and learn the answers.
And sometimes that answer is I'm with you. I hear you.
Yes,
Right?
yeah,
Not every
exactly. Yeah.
not every answer has to be, well, if you turn to Genesis this, and here's exactly how we can explain it, right? If
Hmm.
you have that answer, that's awesome. But we also need to have the answer of, look, I may
Right.
not have all the solutions to your doubts in this very moment, but I love you. I'm here for you. Let's
Well,
explore this
yeah,
together.
because if our answer is always, well, the Bible says this, what if what the person is doubting is the Bible itself?
Hmm.
You know, God is alive and active in so many different things. I mean, that is why I think it's important to have, people with stories and testimonies and examples of what God has done in their lives. And then there is, the experience of being in church itself. There's all these different ways that God works. And when it comes to confronting doubts, they are all part of helping people to see how God works and moves and exists in our world. So yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, it
And
ends up going pretty
sometimes,
deep.
yeah, sometimes your doubts just messing with you, even though they shouldn't be there, or that you don't
Yeah,
actually believe they're still there. I mean, I'm not going to get into specifics here, but this is the final thing I'll say on it, and then we can get
yeah,
your thoughts one more time and move on to the next one. But
yeah,
essentially, during COVID, I was experiencing some doubts that were very
yeah.
difficult for me to go through. And I remember voicing to my dad multiple times, Dad, I know this isn't true, but I'm still doubting. And that was honestly one of
Yeah,
the hardest points in my Christian. is when I was saying, I know this isn't true, but I still
Right.
have doubts.
Right.
And that was what my dad said to me that impacted me is I don't have all the solutions, but I'm here for you.
Yeah.
And just
Yeah.
to know
Yeah.
that somebody was there for me, willing to help me, willing to talk it out with
Yeah.
me, that was huge.
That comfort in the struggle and just having somebody willing to be there with you through the struggle is priceless.
It is. It is.
Absolutely priceless.
It is. All right, good stuff there, Dan. Got two more left.
Okay.
Fourth one is mental illness.
Yeah.
Stereotypes and avoidance keep mental illness silent in the church in a lot of ways, often leaving issues of unresolved, relying solely on prayer without professional help. Sometimes we see mental illness as a boogeyman. Some people will see, what's it called, counseling, stuff like that, as like, oh, I'm too,
Yeah.
this person's too weak, you don't need this, just go read your Bible, pray and it'll go away. I think
Right.
that's
Right. Right. Right.
I
Right.
think
Right.
that's kind of what Zachary is getting at here a
Yeah.
little bit. But Dan, what are your thoughts on mental illness?
I think that in terms of mental illness, I think the church on a broader scale has actually done a pretty good job of embracing this one. For like I said, on a broader scale, I am sure that there are still certain churches out there, probably quite a few. Just once again, we're talking about things that are probably beyond my direct scope of experience, where it's like, oh no, you just need to have more faith, you just need to pray, God's going to take this away, and all this kind of stuff. And it's not like He can't. Okay, if God wanted to, every single thing that's wrong with me tomorrow, He could fix it if he wants to. But the funny thing is, kind of like with the doubts, oftentimes what His goal is for me to seek Him. Okay, and I've used this one before. This is some of the greatest advice I ever got. My grandpa, who's been gone for 20, oh my gosh, I guess he passed away 26 years ago, but I remember as a kid, he once told me, he said, God gave you a brain so you can use it. And sometimes when we have struggles that are physiological, because that's what we're learning, right? A lot of mental illness is tied back to physiology. And this is a developing field. Like there's always new research and new findings going on here. And so I feel, coming back to it in terms of FCC, I feel like we're pretty open to mental illness. I know we've all worked with people that have had these kind of struggles. We know of folks in our church family who have very specific things that they struggle with. And we're certainly not opposed to having those conversations here. Once again, it's a personal thing. But my goodness, we're constantly encouraging people and referring people to actually get the help that they need. We're not going to, if you come into my office and you sit down and you tell me that you're having an issue with whatever specific mental illness it may or may not be, one of the first things we're going to tell you, we are going to pray with you, and then we're going to tell you and try to help you get help. Right? Because God has given us now through exploring His creation and through the wonders of science that He has built into His world, we have now unlocked things from His world that can help us to better deal with these things. We're going to encourage you to chase that down. So what do you think about this one, John? I think that this one's a pretty positive thing in our church, but what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that, it kind of depends on who you talk to because there could be somebody who's dealing with some type of mental illness and doesn't feel like they have support. And if that person feels that way, the church isn't doing a great job in that situation to that person. Not saying overall, but at least in
Yeah.
terms of that person. I think the biggest thing, honestly, with mental illness starts with one person being able to recognize that they are going through something, whether it's anxiety, depression, whatever it might be. And then number two, that other people are recognizing it as well and for that person some type of support. Now, we don't want to go around asking every single individual person, oh, are you feeling anxiety, depressed or anything, but that we would have the openness to be able to say to somebody, hey, I'm really experiencing a lot of anxiety in my life right now, and I got a lot of this going on, and that, whether it be me, you, somebody else would come alongside that person and be there with them and try to seek out the type of help that they would need. That's number one. Number two is that we wouldn't try to be the help if we're not qualified to be that help. Like you said, we are not, you, me, Chris, we are not counselors or anything like that. We can try to point direction, and we are going to do everything we can to try to help you get through that. I had somebody in the church probably 2 ago that was experiencing a lot of anxiety in their lives, and it was kind of crippling in some ways, and they came to me asking for some help, asking for some support, and we got them in touch with a counselor that they were able to go to once a week, and the need for that person to go counselor, because the whole reason they didn't want to go is because they didn't think they had the type of financial backing
Yeah.
or anything to be able to go and do that. Now, they did have it, but once again, you experience a lot of anxiety, financial, whatever it might be, health related. You're going to typically, well, I can't go get help. I can't afford that. Or do I have enough health to be able to do that or something?
Hmm.
And the church can come alongside that person. Again, whether it's me, you, another member that can come alongside them and try to help them. Really what a lot of this comes back to, right? The doubt, the mental illness, and we're going to hit it on the last one here too, is just that you have
Hmm.
community in your church. You
Yeah.
have people that are understanding, are loving, are there for one another. Not every single person in the church needs to be best friends and, every single detail about people's lives. It's uncommon that you would have a church of 300, 400 people. Everybody knows everything about each other, but you do need to
Right.
have people that you are close with, that you have relationships with, that can speak into your lives and are comfortable with being open and honest and hearing out from other people. And I think really that's where the mental illness conversation starts, is are we having those conversations? Are people feeling close enough that they can have those conversations? And then what are we doing to help? Are we trying to help them ourselves when we're unqualified? No, don't do that. Are we trying to help them with a qualified professional who can help in those areas? Yes, we should definitely be doing that.
Hmm. Absolutely. I think the community thing is a big part too, because like, and I didn't think about this when we first started talking about it, but some of this is also depends on how we define mental illness, because it's such a broad term. Are we talking about somebody who's got, the fall blues? Are we talking about somebody who's experiencing, some kind of, what do they call it? Like multiple personality disorder, like one extreme of the spectrum to another, but what the kind of common thread is that I think you brought up that's so important is the idea of community. If you need to be able to seek some kind of help, you need to be plugged in with some people first. And I think that's what we need to be doing, is fostering that community.
Totally. That's where we get into the last point, which is loneliness. Zachary talks about how this impacts many people in the church, including church leaders, due to a lack of communication, identification,
Hmm.
with others' experiences. Honestly, churches have began meeting less in some scenarios than they ever
Yeah. Yeah,
have
it's
before.
true.
You have less people involved in life groups. You have less services. I mean, there. I remember growing up, there was a Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night
Wednesday
church
night.
service,
Yep.
and then
Hmm.
my parents generally had one or two meetings at the church every single night, so we were there probably 4 or 5
Probably five
times.
nights a week. Yeah. Hmm.
Exactly, we were there 4 or 5 times a week. Nowadays, we don't have as much of that going on. Now I think some of that is because of our
Yeah.
digital world, more emphasis on
Yeah. We
like
didn't
life
have
groups and
cell
stuff
phones
like that.
back then. Yeah. Hmm.
Exactly, exactly. So I'm not saying it's bad or anything. It's just something we don't do as much, and I think that is
Yep.
probably contributing to loneliness some. But I think Zachary hit the nail on the head here by mentioning this one last, because some of this stuff really does come all stem from we just aren't close enough and we don't have enough community,
Yeah.
or we aren't being a good enough community to others around us because we're being judgmental or closed off from them or whatever it might be. I've rambled on
Yeah.
long enough. Your thoughts, Dan?
No, I don't really have a whole lot of thoughts on this one, because this is actually the one that I have the most questions about, and not questions about why it is, but more like questions of how to address it. I've read multiple things now on the loneliness epidemic that has basically swept our culture. I mean, this is a huge topic for a lot of people, is dealing with loneliness. And I think that the church should be right there trying to provide solutions for people that are lonely. The digital age, like you just talked about it, there's less human interaction because of the digital age, and this has created for a lot of people this very isolated way of living, which is just creating all this loneliness that people are experiencing. It's heartbreaking to me. Um, so the reason that I don't have a lot of thoughts is because I'm sitting over here thinking, like, what do we really do to address this? What do we really, what can we tangibly do to help mitigate this one a little bit? We've got life groups, we've got Sunday gatherings, we've got a lot of the stuff, and yet we know that this is still a big problem for a lot of folks. Yeah, I'm right on board with him with this one. I think that this is a huge deal, is trying to help people with loneliness. And yeah, I don't know. Do you have any more thoughts on this one, John?
I do think that some of this stems from how much has changed over the years. Before COVID, you didn't have the most community driven stuff, but you did have more than you have now, and a lot of
Yeah.
community for I shouldn't say a lot. There are many people nowadays who find more community online than they do in person,
Hmm.
and I think that
Oh,
that's
I
been a
think that's
really
true.
yeah, I think that's a really big struggle for some people who, as the culture seems to go more that way, there's just less and less people out and about talking, being amongst one another. Like what was it? Probably about 10 years ago, not that long ago, probably, but let's say 7 years ago. This is before COVID. I was out with friends going to a comic book store, and this is my first time ever being in a comic book store, and I thought, okay, it's
Okay.
like a bookstore. You go in, you grab one, you go sit down, you read it for a little bit, you decide if you want to buy it or not. Okay, cool. So I went in there and thought, all right, this is what it is. I went in there, and man, it was one of the most talkative, one of the most, like, people all going around talking about different
Yep.
comics together. I remember
Yep.
one guy
Yep.
approached me because I a Flash comic, and he was asking me,
Yeah.
have you read a lot of Flash comics? Like, I don't know, this is my first time in a comic book store. And he was like, oh man, you just wait. I had no idea who this person was. I'd never met him before, and we talked for a half hour about comics and the Flash, and he loved the Hulk and everything else. And I was like, dude, I have never been in a comic book store before, and the
Yeah.
guys I came here with, haven't seen them for 30 minutes. I'm talking to this dude that I have no idea who he is or anything, but that's that we don't see as much of that stuff today as
Yeah.
we used to, right? Not There's not as many social environments, social gatherings that you can just kind of go out there, meet new
Yeah.
people, socialize. And I think it's even harder nowadays for somebody who is maybe single and trying to go to church, right? Because in today's day and age, there is so much family driven stuff with churches
Yeah.
that you can feel very isolated. You can feel very lonely if you don't have a significant other or maybe a best friend that you go to church with every week or something like
Yeah.
that, because maybe
Yeah.
it's not just that you don't have connections with people, but you don't feel like the church is kind of um or stage of life or what you're
Right.
doing.
Right.
And
It's
I
almost
think
like
that
what's happening here is not for me. Yeah.
exactly. And I think
Hmm.
that can
Hmm.
be lonely in itself, right? At super what was it? Super no, it was at it was this No, it was at Superstar. It was at Superstart. They talked about how you can be in a room of 10,000 people and still feel lonely. And it was
Yeah.
like because
Hmm.
you don't feel like you fit in. You don't feel like you
Right.
identify
Yeah.
with other people. And that was something that for our kids, these are fourth, fifth, and sixth graders, where I asked them, I said, how many times are you in a room with a bunch of people and you feel lonely? And the kids said a lot. And it's like, boy, what are we going through right now that people can
Yeah.
be around other people, can be in a community, but they don't feel like they belong, so they feel
Yeah.
alone. And that's really hard, but I'm with you. I don't know if I have an exact solution to that other than just go out and be as friendly as you possibly can people,
Hmm.
check up on them. I know there's some ladies out there that anytime they think of a person, they got a stash of cards and a
Yeah.
shoebox in their closet, and they just write something to that person and they mail them a card. I've gotten that before from a few, older ladies in the church, and boy,
Yep.
you you kind of think, oh, this is a nice card, and then you leave it on your desk for a little bit, and you go back and you read it, and you're like, that was actually a really really nice gesture that a
Yeah.
person
Yeah.
thought of me, and decided card. Just a really nice thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It means the world. It means the world. Yeah. The world is definitely changing right now. The way that we interact with each other, the way that we create community, the way that we feel about how we kind of fit in, it's all changing right now. And that's a big challenge for the church, because we are a community. And I don't know. This is going to
Well,
be something we're going to have to work on
and
because,
honestly,
yeah,
Dan,
it's a big deal.
it's one of the reasons why I wanted to start FCC Talk is because
Yeah,
I think a
yeah,
lot of times you listen to the you listen to people having conversation and you think, hey, I know that person better now. I may have
yeah,
never
yeah,
had a longer than a 5 minute conversation with them face to face, but I know this person now. And
yeah,
I feel more connected. I feel like I have something that I can go up and talk to them about. It's not say, hi, I'm this person. And
yeah,
so when I say, hey, let us know what your thoughts are on this episode and everything else, I truly do mean it because I think this
yeah.
can facilitate community and help us with one another.
Absolutely, absolutely. I've even experienced a little bit of that with just some of the people that I've connected with online. I'm not really huge into that, but it is it's very interesting to feel that you can actually experience community, even if it is just kind of through a comment section or social media.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Mhm.
All right, Dan. Well, that's all I got. You got anything?
All right, man.
All right. Well, hey, we appreciate you listening to FCC Talk. Dan, last thing, is there anything going on with
Yeah.
worship ministry or anything going on with you at church you want to let people know about or ways they can serve or impact things or anything like that?
Oh, I appreciate that opportunity to say. No, the only thing right now is obviously, I think I probably say this every time because we're constantly looking for more volunteers. I do have a couple of openings right now behind the scenes where I could really use a couple of people who are willing to not necessarily be out in the open, kind of be behind the scenes a little bit and help actually run some of the technology. I'm looking for some people to do sound. I'm looking for some people to do the media. And primarily the media side of things, it's not really super complicated, but it would be super awesome if somebody wanted to, jump in and kind of take that on as a challenge.
If you can click a mouse, you can do
If
it.
you can click a mouse, if you can click a mouse and you can follow a song, you can do this job.
There we go. Sounds like a church goer might be able to do that. So if that's something you're interested in, get in contact with Dan. You can catch him
Yeah,
on
it'd be
Sunday
awesome.
morning, dstribling@fccbrazil.org if you'd like to email him or anything like that. But you know where to find him. Dan, thank you so much for coming on to FCC Talk. Anybody out
All
there
right.
listening, thank you so much for listening. Have a good one, and we'll see you next time.